Okay, so now it is time to turn this over to your questions, and thank you to everybody that has already been asking questions on the Menti app. There are some really good ones in there already. Do keep them coming in, and like I was saying in the first session too, time to vote on those topics that you do want to see addressed as well. So just a reminder again, menti.com, M-E-N-T-I, and the code is 25468, and if you don't have it by now, I will not be reading it again. I'm sure you've got it. So look, we'll start with some of those questions, and I'll throw in a few of my own as well. The top question at the moment that we have regards farm ownership. Are our current models of farm ownership sufficient to provide the funds for technology and expansion of farm scale? So Jock, maybe that's a question for you to take first up. Is there enough money in current models of farm ownership to stay competitive?
Yeah, I think it's a difficult question to answer because I think every business is different, has a different size, has different access to capital. Obviously, when you compare the farming sector generally to other parts of the economy, one of the biggest challenges is the ability for farm businesses to access equity capital for growth. So there's plenty of debt capital, and there's plenty of strong providers who want to keep providing debt capital for growth, but for any business trying to get the right mix of equity and debt is really important to create a sustainable future in a relatively volatile industry. So there's a point where debt capital maxes out, and then that's probably a point where you're then constrained for access to capital. So if there's a big opportunity in investing back in your business for technology or any sort of productivity enhancing activity, investing in your people, there's a whole lot of things you can do with growth capital, then that is a challenge. There is no sort of readily available equity capital market, and I think there are some interesting models that have been promoted around the world around fractional ownership and different ways of allowing farm businesses to access additional equity. So, but that's not present really in Australia today. So each certainly in a family business unit, that's a choice they then have to make about how they choose to either leverage their business more or take different choices around how they access that technology.
One thing we hear a bit about on the country when we talk about this kind of stuff is superannuation companies' attitude and investment towards agriculture, and people lamenting the fact that there's not more of it. There has been a few more examples of that. Is it something that you think will become bigger? Do you think super companies will be throwing a bit more money at ag?
Well, I think the current interesting situation in Australian agriculture is that overseas foreign, I know there's already a question on foreign investment, so I thought I'd get ahead of the curve. The foreign pension funds and super funds seem quite happy investing in Australian agriculture and appear to have more appetite for it than the Australian super funds. We actually have a couple of Australian super funds investing in our particular vehicle, so we've got a mix of domestic and foreign capital. But I think part of the challenge for agriculture, it's not going to be easy for a super fund to invest in a small family business. They probably, depending on the size of the super fund, they probably want to invest $50 to $100 million at a time, and they probably want to only own 5% of the vehicle. So it's going to be, at this stage, there's no obvious way for a super fund to take a $1 to $5 million stake in 10 different family farms. That probably wouldn't be very attractive to them from an administrative point of view, but it's possibly a great source of opportunity, and so maybe models will emerge that allow that to happen through some intermediary vehicle, I think. But fundamentally, I think farming has to continue to work hard to demonstrate to Australian super funds that they can deliver risk-adjusted returns that are better than what they could get investing in other asset classes, and that's probably the main reason why Australian super funds haven't jumped on the bandwagon, because all we hear here in Australia is about droughts and bushfires and how challenging it is in farming, and we don't get a lot of positive media coverage for the sector.
Oh, so it's my fault.
Yes.
A similar question, which kind of follows along quite nicely, is how do we change the public perception that the only way to get into agriculture is if you're born into it? We hear about how hard it can be because of the capital costs, because of buying in, and even, Amy, with your story, when you think you might and then you don't. Do you see a way in now, or is it just too hard?
I guess like this is something I've kind of looked at for my own, like, you know, I guess personal goals in wanting to own my own farm eventually. I guess as it is at the moment, share farming can kind of be like a way to kind of get into the industry and kind of have a good business plan. I was kind of having a chat to my friends from NAB last night about this. So I guess kind of as far as a business perspective, I don't call myself like an economist or anything, but I think like maybe through kind of proving yourself in a share farming situation and kind of building up some capital as well might be a way, but I guess it just takes so long. So I guess like for myself, if I was to kind of wait and kind of do that kind of I guess plan, I probably would be maybe 40 by the time I got onto my own farm. That's kind of what I think, but I'm not sure. I'm not like an expert on this, so I'm happy for anyone to kind of jump in.
That's not very old.
Well,
You've got a lot of good years left.
like, you know, that's 17 years of someone's, you know, ability to put into their own farm. Like, it actually is like quite a significant amount of time when you look at like your career in agriculture, like 17 to 20 years. Like, you kind of want to utilise as much time as you can on your own farm to kind of, you know, get to that level. Because if you're kind of starting off when you're 40, then by the time you're 50 or 55, you might have gotten the farm like up to the level that you want it to be at. So that's just my thoughts anyway.
And James, I might come to you in a second on this, but in some breaking news, we think we've got the video sorted. So we're going to give it one more go.
Oh, okay. Well, lucky, all of you are very lucky now.
Better be good.
This is, I've talked it up, haven't I? This is where I fall flat on my face.
Oh, there you go.
There we go.
Okay?
It was
It was worth the wait. It was worth the wait.
well worth it. And so off the back of that, James, on this idea of getting into agriculture, do you see your business as a way of maybe making it a bit more accessible?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, I guess, you know, if you were to look at technology, it's definitely going to be a gateway to being able to access agriculture and become, I guess, involved, whether you own businesses in farming or whether you're a tech side or a data side of ag. There's different variants, but our technology is designed for people with minimal to no expertise in farming whatsoever can actually become farmers. They don't have to have that traditional upbringing. I always say to people that contact us that, you know, you still have to be a farmer. As much as we like to be perceived as being armchair farmers where you're doing everything on an app this day and age and changing all the nutrient recipes via phone, and the plants are all healthy and happy. You still have to farm. There's an element of farming involved, whether you use the technology that we use and have all the data that's coming through to your use. You still need to be able to know what to do with it all. But the access, yeah, absolutely. I think we've got ex-nurses and doctors using our farms in Canada and North America. So it doesn't mean you have to have that connection.
And we've had a follow-up question that's shot up through the ranks, which I'm sure you're going to love. How much does it cost?
Don't fall off your chairs now. No, 170. A primary farm which gets you to basically plug in and start growing straight away, it's 172,000, and that's what we'll deliver in terms of the yields. Or projected yields are north of 1.2 tonnes worth of food a year.
And then you can choose to grow if you want to from there.
Yeah. So you can different types of cultivars. We've tried over 50 different cultivars in our vertical tower system. So things from berries to hops.
Great. A question for Ruth that's come through on the workforce side of things. Do you recruit or do you retrain for a skilled workforce?
Both. I think there's a couple of things perhaps I could say that draws some of what we just discussed together. Really, a lot of people want to work in the businesses that James just described. Not just because of they can get into it, but it's about the vision that goes with the business around the microcircular economy, cutting food waste and cutting food miles. So a lot of people are attracted into perhaps wanting to work in agriculture or own businesses in agriculture based on the vision and the meaning with what they're doing. So I think that's something important to think about. The other side, I suppose, is the ownership question there. We can see through the structural change in agriculture and the increasing number of employees on farm, that's opening up all different types of career pathways. And Amy mentioned share farming, and there's a number of sectors that are really trying to look at ways of entry, whether it's through leasing, whether it's through owning machinery, whether it's through owning livestock, etc. That's the part, building career pathways from the sector itself, and also that there's a lot of people that want to enter agriculture that not necessarily own or be in farm ownership, that the role of the professional managers and assistant managers and others, all different roles, and that's sort of opening up. So I suppose I see that as part of the ownership question, not just always to be binary, do you own or do you not? If we're trying to build the future of agriculture, we've got to bring in as many people as possible, the diversity possible, and there's different ways we can do it. Yeah. Oh, the recruit retrain, sorry.
Yes.
Employers are the greatest source of people development. I'm from a university. I work with TAFE people. We like to say that we're the source of skills and development, but it is employers and it is the workplace. So that's the retrain. We know from some of our studies that we've done in horticulture that there was no difference between someone who just came into a business for the job versus someone who's been there from the bottom up in terms of their retention. So that people that come for jobs, if they're given sort of that development and that vision for career, they will stay. So I think it is both. We still have to be recruiting the new skills, the different capabilities needed, but we really need to be thinking about the people we've got.
Yeah, I'll just quickly touch on the whole training side of things. We just delivered a farm to Queensland TAFE in Toowoomba, part of their agricultural centre of excellence. So they're going to use that as a curriculum as part of their ag school to teach kids about or to open their minds around what farming in the future may look like. Not necessarily modular farms or that particular way has to be the way we farm, but to really just embrace that technology is moving so fast and that to get them thinking about, well, this is one bit of technology that's available right now. What does the future, look like? And gets them straight into it. Like, they don't have to, look at it on pictures, and they're actually physically, working in the future. Yeah.
Amy, to follow up on one of the points that Ruth just raised, you talked about that idea of maybe following the vet path, maybe following the farming path. From the people that you speak to, people that are, would be classified, I guess, as young farmers, the stereotype, I guess, is, like you said, if you're working on a farm, you're up before dawn and you're back when the sun's down. Is being a vet a bit more appealing, because theoretically at least you do a 9 to 5?
Does anyone here know any vets? Because no, I think vets kind of generally a pretty hard-working profession. You have like a lot of after hours and that kind of thing as well. I guess it depends what you kind of do with vet. I guess the attraction for me into vet is that I can still be like quite involved in the ag industry and kind of take the more aggy kind of path while using my vet degree, if that kind of makes sense. If that kind of answers your question. But like, I think just with that question before, I was just thinking like how Ruth was saying, like, it's the the values and stuff that might draw people into a company. I guess from like a family farming perspective, you kind of do it out of love sometimes as well. So I think it can be hard to kind of separate business and the farm, because I guess like, if anyone here is off a farm, raise your hands if anyone's a farm kid. Yeah, you kind of really know, and you have that connection with the land that I guess is really hard to describe unless you've actually lived it. So I guess for kids that kind of fall out of, I guess, the opportunity to run the family farm, I think the attraction there is for, businesses to kind of, that have values, that you're not just going to work for someone and that's your job and it's pretty boring. Like, you kind of want to be contributing to something, because I guess when it's your own land, you work it, and every day you're going out and it's yours, and there's a real attachment and a high value emotionally as well. And I think kind of companies emerging kind of that have a high value and a high, I guess, emotional give back to their employees. I guess that's quite nice to see coming through as well.
Well, I think it's probably time for our great Jock versus Amy Great debate about the future of the family farm. Just jesting. But there is one of the top questions that has come through is Australian farming has been traditionally dominated by family farms. Will this continue, or will it change? So who wants to start? Jock, do you want to start with why you think family farms do have a strong future?
Well, I think it's for a lot of the stuff that Amy's just been talking about. It's this deep connection, it's this ability to prevail, be resilient, to survive the volatility, to be more patient with their capital, to take a longer term view, all the things that are really important in running a successful agricultural business. And I think, families are probably better set up to do that than most other ownership structures, because they can take that very long view and contemplate how they're going to negotiate their way a long way into the future. But I think there is still, there's still some criteria they have to meet to have a successful future, and certainly, nobody wants the amount of capital they have is important in allowing them to reinvest and maintain current technological opportunities to make sure their productivity growth is as strong as it needs to be a high performing farm. Because the best way to preserve your future is to be able to produce strong economic performance and hence have economic growth in your business, and that'll mean you're going to be here for the long term. So I think family farms are really well set up. Not all family farms, but there's a lot of family farms that are really well set up to take advantage of that opportunity. And if we look at, I think your opening comments with a number of farmers were falling in Australia, and sometimes that gets corporate agriculture is buying family farms, and some of that is happening, but a lot of it is the big successful family farms buying out the unsuccessful family farms that are struggling for various reasons, sometimes within their own control and sometimes beyond their control. But that that it is happening, and that while it's challenging for those who are leaving the sector emotionally, if you step back from a macro view, it's probably creating a stronger, healthier overall ag sector in Australia.
Amy, you mentioned your concerns, I guess, about the future of the family farm. What are those concerns?
Well, I guess, like, as you've all heard from my personal story, with succession planning, I think some people, they do consider it, and it is becoming something that's kind of at the front of people's minds more these days. I guess, from my perspective, it's kind of been, with our farm, it's like, I guess the family issues kind of go across to the business kind of issues. So I guess for people that can kind of, and for families that can kind of separate business from family and kind of work together without kind of letting family issues, or, whether it's someone who's controlling or whatever, to kind of, dictate how the business is run. I think that's definitely something that families need to be aware of, is kind of having that kind of differentiation between, family, emotional, whatever stuff compared to your business kind of side. And I guess on the technology kind of side, I can't get mobile reception outside. I have to drive about 20 minutes to get 1 to 2 bars maybe. So I guess when you look at apps and things that are kind of being developed, people they can't go out to to their paddock and kind of, use mobile reception to use the app, or they can't do a Facebook Live to market their business because there's just no internet for them, or no phone reception for them to do that in the paddock. So I feel like that kind of restricts people in how they can utilise current technologies, which is not ideal. So I guess basic infrastructure is needed in rural areas in general, but I think it kind of affects family farms to that extra level, perhaps. But I'm not sure what your opinion is on that.
Oh, I think access to technology and connectivity is a real infrastructure issue for agriculture, regardless of the ownership structure again. So I think the other thing that you're talking about is, and it's back to the recruit or retrain. I do believe that as a sector, agriculture probably has lagged other parts of the economy in the way that it skills up and trains and develops people historically. And I think part of that was because there was a huge surplus of labour that wanted to work in farming, and so. And I think, but this is a story that's now been in our industry for probably at least the last 15 years, particularly with the rise of the mining sector and other people who compete for our labour, often with higher remuneration structures and other things. I think the agricultural industry has had to respond, and has responded in catching up and closing that gap on how well it does train people, and how just the general level of education that penetrates the sector, which comes with business skills, so that hopefully, succession planning and other things, as well as just general business planning, is conducted in a more professional way going forward. So I think that line is moving from bottom left to top right. There's probably still a way to go, but the industry is generally better educated and better skilled than it was, and I think more and more employers understand the benefits of investing in the development of their staff than a generation ago, as much to retain them and create a career path for them to get them to stay than what was around. So I think things are healthier in that regard than they were, despite the obvious challenges.
Ruth, on that note of employment, this may be again a stereotype, but is there a difference between working on a corporate farm for someone else versus working for the family farm? If you're working on a corporate farm and it's big enough, you may have an HR department. It may be done a little bit more professionally. If you're a family farm, you can't fire your brother or sister or dad if you wanted to.
Oh yes, well we've.
Well, you can, you can try.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. The only difference, because I don't think it's setting it up as that polarised view is helpful. I see a lot of family farms that really embrace these processes and practices equally as corporates. So I think one of the difficulties is that small to medium-sized farms can't really retain an internal labour market, so there's not a lot of opportunities for promotion. And so this is where the between farm aspect of development of people, comes into play. So in terms of overall the difference around corporate and family, it's really still, you can have those principles of looking after people, creating meaningful work, offering a level of autonomy relevant to the position that a person's in. Any farm can do that. And we look a lot at family farms in terms of their employment. We talk to a lot of employees. And I can see that you can have employees on the family farms with those processes and practices in place that won't, are really flourishing. So I don't like to see it as a dichotomy. I think it is about the practices and the effort put into people development, no matter what size nor structure.
And then, sorry, go on.
Yeah, just one idea that I had a startup come and see me the other day, and their idea was to try and help sort of semi-skilled, unskilled labour on farms have a way of keeping their sort of CV up to date and online. So they sort of, their idea was once you'd done your chemical cert training or your chainsaw or your forklift or whatever, they basically linked in for farm workers, and that could then go with them when they change jobs in this farm-to-farm market. They'd be more, it'd be easier for other employers to identify them. They could immediately justify their skills and capabilities, and I think that's probably something, I think it's a pretty good business idea. I don't know if it'll work. They've got to find a way to work out who's going to pay for it, but I think that sounded like a pretty good idea to me, to help. And even they were even contemplating that they could help those individuals with a bit of career planning and an understanding of what skills they had to acquire, because it was a bit easier to see because it was on a list or something. And if you did 5 more years of this and added these skills, then you'd be well positioned to go up to that next level, which is very well done by corporations outside agriculture in mapping people's careers for them. And so I think something, because of the fragmentation of agriculture, it's a bit harder to do, but if that sort of vehicle emerged and was widely used, I think it could go a long way to helping some of this challenge.
There's been a little bit of talk about the role of technology and how that's changing and also challenging agriculture as well. Ruth, do you think that in the future, we hear a lot about automation, we hear a lot about mechanisation. Eventually, do labour shortage issues become a thing of the past, or will they always be there to some degree?
Yeah, I think it's going to be really good to hear about technology from the specific businesses. From the different farm systems that I've looked at, it's very hard. So there's technology that augments labour, so makes things easier, more efficient, and works with a particular labour force that you might have, or change the nature of the workforce. And then there's the labour replacing technology. I think with the complexity of our farming systems, it's very hard to predict the particular workforce outcome from a particular technology. So I've had a bit of familiarity with robotic dairying, and also the introduction of the round bale picker in cotton. And sometimes you might think there might be, you put a robot in, it milks this many cows and you replace a person. It's usually, 0.7 of or 0.6 or 0.5. And then same with sort of in the cotton sector around the round bale picker, that there's other sort of implications or changes that happen around the technology. Then, you get things like the virtual agronomist, or the way data can be used to augment or replace staff, and that's a different story. So I think it's quite specific. And in terms of, we can spend a lot of time saying, we just won't need people, so let's not worry about it, to working with the changes that are going on. And this is my point, I suppose, about that workforce and people is definitely an R&D sort of issue. If I see anything different about how overseas people are investing in R&D, in New Zealand, in Europe, in America, it is to really try and understand that this technology...
So powerful technology.
Technology is causing its own problems, yeah.
I'll just talk right over it.
Obviously.
The people win.
People win all the time. No, that we really need to be, understanding this as it morphs. We've got to look at how farming systems are morphing, the role of technology, the role of people, and do it in real time. And the best way to do that is to have people as a focus in the R&D investments that we're making around this. So I see a lot, Internet of Things, trials and things like that. To what way are we looking at? What is the implication around workforce? Can we be ahead of the game in terms of collaborations between education, employers, scientists and farmers around the workforce implications? I think we've got to be more on the front foot than just waiting for something to happen.
And so, on that, James, I'm sure you have a lot to say, but how do you see the role of people in your farms compared to the role of people in quote-unquote traditional ag? Yeah,
look, it's a question that I get emailed a lot during the week. How do I get involved in indoor agriculture or any type of farming, or particularly what we do? And it's a tough question to answer, because there's no one way to just sort of say, look, you go this direction and you become a vertical farmer, and then before you know it, the doors will just open. And yes, the entry level of being able to purchase a farm is not cheap either. It's probably a little bit cheaper than buying a farm of sorts. But I guess the farm out, we find that there's a balance in technology. Our system particularly is designed around using the person's skills and actually it works out to be about 30 hours a week work in our farm. No less, no more really. It's sort of Groundhog Day in there. It just becomes a normal working week. So in terms of expanding that, I know a lot of the indoor vertical farms have now really just shifted straight into automation. So we're seeing, I think, a third of Japan's fresh produce is actually grown indoors, and most of those indoor farms are fully automated farms. So what does that mean for the individual in terms of upskilling individuals and teaching them the right skills to be able to be partake in this industry? It's a tough question, but I agree with Ruth. I think that there has to be a combination of areas that sort of drive to that one common goal, and that's to be able to upskill people quick enough with the move in technology.
Do you see that there'll always be a role for people, or does it get to the point where pure automation is a thing?
I like the role of people. Yeah, I still think even with the virtual agronomy and things like that, I still think, and I say it all the time, you still have to be a farmer to be able to farm. You have to feel it, smell it, touch it. As good as technology is, I think that taking that away, I'm just not a big fan of it. But I mean, I despite we work in the technology space, I still like the hands and feel of seeing your crop, touching, smelling, tasting your crop.
Just a reminder too, this is what in radio we call a reset. We are here at ABARES. My name's Nicola Balehartz. I could go on, but I won't. With the normal radio spiel, abc.net.au/rural is the website address for us. But the website address that you should be on is menti.com. Again, if any more questions are coming to mind as this session keeps going, do head back to menti.com and keep those questions coming. A follow-up one for you, James, but on a different topic, and I'm sure others will want to weigh in on this as well, is keeping biosecurity front of mind. What do you perceive to be the challenges to the farms of the future? How big of an issue is biosecurity for you?
Not unless you walk something in. So it is a big issue, but the only way you can get in is through a human or on your clothes. So it's a tough one, because while we even with our technology, we have what we call a showroom farm in Brisbane, and even having people come through that, we've had numerous biological things come in and causes problem in our farm. So if you were to farm in our technology, we highly stress it becomes almost a hospital-like system and feel about it. I mean, whatever gets in there is going to love it, because it's 22.5 degrees and 65% humidity, 365 days a year. So it's not a bad place to work in when it's hot outside in Brisbane or cold in Melbourne, but so it will thrive when it does enter. From a sort of plant side of things, you can still develop problems through seed genetics and things like that. So you have to be cautious about where you're finding your seed from, but particularly people walk most of our problems in.
Okay. Jock, what about you? Do you see, is it kind of front of mind, biosecurity, when you think about the farms of the future? Is that a worry? Because some of it is outside your control.
Yeah, I think biosecurity is a massive challenge for Australian agriculture, but also obviously one of our biggest competitive advantages in the fact that we don't have a lot of the diseases here that other countries do, and we're pretty good at keeping them out. So, I think there's a lot of work done continually by government to try and prepare Australia for some of these outbreaks that would, certainly in the broadacre system, it's probably different in how we would manage that, and I think there's a lot of learnings from how Australia can prepare itself and continue to trade off those competitive advantages. So I think it's definitely on the front of mind of governments, and there, to my knowledge, there's good plans in place to be able to manage those if they do eventuate.
And a quick follow-up one for you too on foreign investment in Australian ag. So this question says, e.g. international investors buying Australian farms. Does that benefit the Australian economy and family farms, or does it drain profits outside Australia?
So I think it's pretty hard to drain lots of profit out of agriculture and take it offshore. And I think that if you look at the history of Australia, of foreign investment, I think there's actually a stronger case that foreign capital has come in an industry that we've just said is short on new capital, and has actually invested funds that maybe not otherwise would have been invested. So if you again look at it at a whole of industry level, I think foreign capital allows us to do things and take the actual underlying infrastructure and the level of development on farms up to another level. And if they take a bit of money out of the country as a result of that, I don't think that's a criminal offence, as long as they leave the land behind in a better condition than they found it, and take the future productivity of that land in the right direction. So, but I think anybody who's got a deep history in the industry, it's not, if you bring in $100 million or something, it's very hard to take most of that back out offshore. The argument sometimes tends to come more on a food security issue, like is the foreign capital going to come in, tie up all the food supply and take it back to a foreign country, and we're all going to be left here starving, which I think is it's a reasonable scenario to contemplate. But we export between 70 and 85% of all the food that we produce. So the point at which Australia runs out of food, I think the government would intervene before it would allow food to be exported out of Australia if the domestic population was having trouble accessing food.
Okay. Another question we've come across, which I think would be interesting probably to put to all of you, is what is the opportunity for behavioural economics or little policy nudges to assist farmers to take up new technologies and practices? So if you could go to government, I guess, another way of putting it, if you could go to government and say, here's one way that would make life a bit easier for us, what would it be? Do you want to start, James?
Access to money.
More money.
Yeah, you can never have enough of it, really, when you start in ag tech. But yeah, no, I think even like for our business particularly, I mean, a bit of background. We've been privately funded all through this journey, so it's been quite difficult for us to be able to access economic benefit from the government. Whilst we say we're progressive and we like our technologies, I've found that it's probably been much more difficult to be able to really find the right areas and access to funds to be able to develop and grow our idea or our technology. It's only when your business starts getting runs on the board, then you start seeing doors open. And that period is probably the hardest period for any entrepreneur or business. And that's probably where I see a lot of opportunity for government to step in. But even like private investment, of course, because you've got your VCs and that do come at that early stage. But if government were able to sort of harness that early, I guess, period of a business and get them sort of progressing quicker, I think that would be a great great opportunity for anyone coming into ag.
What about you, Amy?
I guess again, money is key in a lot of these kind of scenarios. So I guess that could be in the form of grants to help startups or help people onto farms. I also think like training and education, like if there is a technology that could kind of help everyone, why not go into communities and kind of run training programs through like local land services or something like that. And again, just access to basic infrastructure, like again, the internet and mobile service kind of thing. I guess like on the internet perspective, if you don't have reliable internet, it's really hard to work from home. So if you kind of want to run your business from your office on your farm or wherever you are, like you kind of like, and I think in regional communities, it's like one of the biggest things is that if you don't have internet, it kind of cuts you off, like from opportunities to kind of, you could have like an additional business off your farm by selling earrings or whatever it is that you want to make at home, like as a business. So I think it's really critical that basic mobile and internet infrastructure is, in these times, like it's really a necessity, isn't it? So it's really denying people their opportunity to, I guess, access basic human needs in these kind of times. So that's just the way of looking at it. But yeah.
I can quickly add to that. No 4G or Wi-Fi, no farm for us. So So I mean, it's all data. It's all data gathering. It has to be connected.
Right.
Yeah.
Jock, you're not allowed to say money.
Yeah, no, I don't think government should be giving money. I think, except maybe in connectivity infrastructure, that's the one area I'd argue that there's a point. I've been involved with a bunch of conversations around this, and obviously the government does help some of the telco providers in trying to fill some of the holes. But as the amount of data required and this sort of digital farm of the future, which has got all these sensors and Internet of Things, real-time reporting back to a database and allowing the digital agronomists to do their jobs, doesn't work if the farm hasn't it can't access connectivity. So it's an interesting debate about who should fund that, the private capital or is it one of these things governments can help with. I think generally speaking, as what government should be doing to help, I think the challenge in the farming community is that there's probably a fierce subset of the farming community that's fiercely independent, doesn't want to be told by government what to do, and is not listening to government. So your ability to change them in any way, shape or form is a very, very poor cost-benefit analysis. And then the people who are engaged, listening to government, they're probably using all of the skills and tools the government is providing. It's probably working quite well. So it's trying to understand which side of that line you're on, because a lot of the times I think the government's come out and try and do a one package for all solution, and they just don't penetrate certain segments of the marketplace.
Do you think the independent farmers could ever be won over, or it's not worth putting time into?
Well, I think there's a point where the cost of trying to change their behaviour, if that's what the question was, behavioural economics, is just too great relative to the chance of actually changing them. So I think you've got to let some people chart their own course.
Amy, you wanted to raise a point?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, do you think that if there was a grant or something to kind of allow for education or use of a technology, though, that some farmers would go, oh, why not give it a go?
I think I tried to say there's two segments, and I think those grants are available to help train people. Those grants are available to for example, with all the different drought programs around becoming more drought resilient, being able to invest in water infrastructure, they're all there, and I think the one end of the farming community is using them, and it's working well. But I think sometimes governments come out thinking that they can change the whole of the industry, and there's just a bunch of people who don't want to engage.
Ruth, what are your thoughts?
I'm going to go on a different track here. As a social scientist about behavioural economics, I think that's best put to the Biodiversity Fund and the Carbon Fund from today. I think that would be very useful there. In terms of we're getting more and more knowledge about what's really constraining adoption around the technology space, and this is something necessarily that behavioural economics won't necessarily contribute to, and that is the inherent risk that even the early farmers have sort of encountered, whether that's businesses that have failed and their data's been lost or things like that. So there's still, I think, a perception of a fair bit of risk around some of these developments, or that it's too hard to change or adapt around the digital space or other things. And so I suppose what some of our research has found is the role of the farm advisor is pretty important here, and if they're in the same position, it's too risky, it's too hard to change, then you're getting a double whammy of this has all got too much risk, I'm going to wait until it's much more certain. We know that that's not the answer either. So I suppose I'd suggest that there would be benefit in not necessarily the policy nudges, but having platforms, and the role of industry here is really important. We've got a big investment in RD&E that is really helping farms come along on that journey. There's a big gap between the after-sales service and the learning challenge on farm, and there's the limits there between what a company will supply in ongoing service relative to the farm learning demand. That gap is a public-private gap, and I think that's where it should be.
Okay. One more question. It has to do with environmental stewardship. How will farmers of the future view environmental stewardship? Jock, you mentioned earlier that idea of if a foreign investor does come into Australia, buys land, that one of the things you want to see happen is that they leave it in good condition. Would those international investors care about leaving it in good condition?
Well, certainly the ones that we deal with care deeply about that, because they are some at the forefront of this move for sustainability, and they are very energised around the fact that they can create a more sustainable world through the way they deploy their capital. So, particularly any pension fund based in a Western economy is highly motivated by this stuff, and is I think quite a way ahead of the Australian sector. So if you want to raise money to invest in an Australian farm story, and you haven't got a story around how you are going to be a good citizen and manage sustainability on their behalf, then you're highly unlikely to get any money from them. So I would say they're very much at the forefront of that space. But I agree with all the comments that were made earlier today that this is a really exciting space for Australian agriculture as biodiversity and carbon emissions get right up the top of the government agenda. How schemes can be built to allow farmers to monetise some of those ecosystem services. I know it's been talked about for a number of years, but it feels like it's closer now than it ever has been, and I think that becomes a really interesting new revenue stream for all farmers, but whether they're family or corporate owned. But certainly if you end up in this world where you get a consistent, reliable income source to go alongside your climate and market affected income sources, it's going to make your business a lot more robust. And if it means you have to change the way you manage the landscape to benefit society overall, I think that's going to be a thing a lot of farmers are prepared to sign up to.
James, is it a big part of your business, the idea of environmentalism? Is it a draw card, a marketing tool?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the drive to be more sustainable is definitely part of what we're doing. Obviously, you'd argue that a system like ours does use a lot of energy to produce. So, I mean, like anything with the evolution of technology, I think the drive is always going to be how to become more sustainable in our industry, and technology is allowing us to do that. Even renewable resources are becoming more attractive in terms of the economic benefit to adding that to our system. But yeah, absolutely, we being able to grow food that's chemical and pesticide free is one factor, but then to become completely off grid and sustainable in terms of zero inputs or taking away from or outputs of the you know, the environment is pretty powerful. I mean, even the stuff that we grow in is made out of recycled plastic, so, and it's continuously used, so we don't have a lot of waste in our system. We try to keep that to a bare minimal, and even now talking about biodigesters and using whatever food waste we do have to create our energy. So definitely sustainability is on the forefront of our mind as a business, yeah.
Okay, we'll wrap up this one session with one question to all of you. I want you to close your eyes, look through the respective lenses that you've been talking about today, and picture the farm. What is the farm in the future for you? James, do you want to start?
Oh, that's easy. I
Yours.
keep my eyes closed while I talk.
Yours, yeah. But do you I mean, is it going to be mainstream what you do, or will it be niche for a long time?
It's hard to say. It's hard. It's definitely niche at the moment, but look, you know, we definitely have a big picture view on where it can go, the technology. I'm definitely in the side that says that all our food will be grown indoors. And, you know, people will argue, oh, what about rice and corn? I know for a fact in China they're already growing rice indoors or trialling rice indoors. So, I mean, whether that becomes the norm in, say, 50 or 100 years' time, it's yet to, you know, I don't know if a lot of us will be around, probably not me, but so yeah, absolutely. I think you know, that I see some sort of indoor farming definitely being a player in the way we source food. Whether that eliminates all other agriculture needs, I doubt it. So, but yeah, an idea of, you know, a clinical room with, you know, plants growing out of it. It does take that romantic, you know, soil in my veins attitude, but again, when we're feeding an extra 2 billion people, we have to look at other alternatives, and as it was said this morning, you know, generating more land to grow food is not the answer. Definitely not.
Thank you. Amy, what's your farm of the future?
I see a lot of diversity, I guess, in agriculture in the future, and I guess whether it's hydroponic based systems or you know, people like I can't remember the lady's name, but she grows maggots and bugs and what's her name again? Anyway,
Olympia.
yeah. Anyway, but I just see like lots of different things. Like there's so many opportunities in agriculture, and I guess like when I have a think about what I see as farms of the future, like whether it's family farms, you know, as well as corporates utilising technology, like maybe growing feed for their cattle, you know, via hydroponic systems, or I guess kind of a mix of technology and traditional farming practices, as well as just different business structures that we've never really thought of before. And there's so much innovation and so many new ideas, I guess, coming to the fore at the moment, which is really exciting to see. So yeah.
Good to hear.
Just
Jock,
everything.
Yeah, I agree with Amy. Yeah. I think the future is very bright. There's a lot of people to feed. Some of them will be fed from an indoor farm, some will be fed from a broadacre farm, but there'll be an educated workforce with great careers. There will be more use of technology and to manage some of the volatility. And you know, the future will be about people enjoying the business and personal benefits of being in the farming community, and enjoying what we do, and with a very strong demand profile. So I think the farm of the future is, it will be diverse. There'll be different models come forward, but I think it'll be a very bright future.
And Ruth?
Not much left to say after that. I was going to say diversity. I was going to say keep taking care of the people. I suppose from what James said, it's really interesting that a lot of the Europeans' farming systems, the indoor systems, particularly animal production, they're looking at ways to innovate to make their production systems more transparent, because part of the issue with consumers is that what's going on behind those, you know, those closed doors. So they're looking at glass around cows and things like that. So I think that idea of transparency and people, you know, wanting to know about their food, I think that's a trend, a common trend. So I suppose just with the people focus, I think that's what I can imagine rewarding for everybody in the system, rewarding careers, good jobs, great workplaces. That's how I see Australia moving, and that's the reputation that we can build for agriculture.
Ruth, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for all your questions today. It's really greatly appreciated.